everyone, welcome to the CB vlog. Our big deck discussion this week. What's your plan B?
Yeah, what do
Right?
you do if your plan A fails?
Right. What do you do when you get your partner pregnant and you have to go to the drugstore and you have to buy that special drug? No, not that. You got to have a plan B, because if sometimes your plan A is something that is absolutely taken off the table from you, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that can happen, right? So
Definitely.
maybe your plan A revolves around a combo, so you need a couple of cards, and maybe one or two of those pieces get exiled. Or maybe your plan A involves your commander, and your commander's been destroyed a few times, and it's a bit too expensive to get back from the command zone. Or just maybe, you're doing like some sort of key creature combat thing, and they exile that creature. Like maybe you're putting all your eggs in one basket, and that happened. I think most decks fall into two camps: decks that want to win with specific cards, and then decks that are just like, oh, my deck's just doing good things, and eventually through value and momentum I will overwhelm everybody.
Right.
And I think that in both cases, those plans, your opponents, if they see it coming, they're going to try to disrupt you. So what do you do if your plan A fails? Well, obviously you got to go to a plan B. And I think it's important to look at your deck and think about, do I have another way to stop that? Like, I know personally, I know that my deck, sometimes, if my creature-based decks, I might put in a lot of like, ooh, if my creatures get destroyed, then that's my plan A failing. But I'll just put in a thing to make them all indestructible for a turn, perhaps. Maybe I'll put Make a Stand in so that they all get indestructibility. But that's not the same as my plan B. That's just protecting my plan A even further.
Yeah.
In that case, a plan B would be, do I have a way to rebuild my army quickly?
Yes. Protection is just that, right? It protects the plan that you want. And it's important, too. You need to have those things, because plan A is probably your best plan. So that's the one you actually want to have go off without a hitch. So when you build in that protection, you put a Lightning Greaves on your commander or whatever. You throw in Rootborn Defenses to protect your token army or whatever. Those become very important, but there are just lots of times when that Greaves gets blown up, or that Rootborn Defenses gets countered. So then what? Then what do you do? Are you just sitting there being like, I wish I had my commander, or I wish I had my token army? Because if so, like, that's not a good plan. That's not a good deck necessarily. I mean, it might be a great deck, but if it's able to be like stopped so easily, you're going to want to have something else to do. So that's where plan B comes in. We had a recent game where this sort of came up, and it was very interesting to see how through my own deck building like urges and like just the things that are kind of like ingrained, I guess, over the years of playing Commander, how this deck was able to be resilient and actually come back. And it turns out that in building this one strategy around one specific card, I had actually unknowingly built in a bunch of redundancy as well. So that's one thing. That's one way to do it. Step one is redundancy. If you have a commander or something that has a particular ability, you can find other like substitutes for that ability, right?
I think a great example of this would be, especially now since the new Niv Mizzet is spoiled too. I think Niv Mizzet and its ability to do 1 damage when you draw a card, and then we also, those decks often run Psychosis Crawler because it's kind of the same thing. Whenever you draw a card, everyone takes a point of damage. That could be your win con, but if they get rid of Niv Mizzet, if they get rid of Psychosis Crawler, then you're kind of stuck just drawing a ton of cards and wheeling a bunch. But for what? I mean, well, hopefully you have a few other creatures in there who can do some damage. Or maybe your win con then becomes Lab Maniac. Maybe at that point you're like, well, I guess I'll just mill myself out and hopefully stick a Lab Maniac. Maybe that's your plan B.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great, the Niv Mizzet deck, the one that, and we're talking about it because, the new Niv Mizzet got spoiled the other day, and a lot of things we were saying about it, a lot of criticisms of it, is that, like, does this commander's deck look any different than the Niv Mizzet that we know already? And the answer is, whatever. Yes and no. You can build it kind of a different way, but yeah, there's a lot of the same cards in there. And a lot of those cards, like your Laboratory Maniacs or your Psychosis Crawlers, are other win conditions that work on the same angle as that commander. So that's where redundancy comes in. You don't need to have Niv-Mizzet necessarily if you have Psychosis Crawler, because it can do the same thing. Or if your Psychosis Crawler gets exiled, yeah, Lab Maniac's great. So that's a great example of redundancy helping out.
Yeah, so I would call that sort of like building more of the same, right? So you're sort of like taking your deck and you're just, whatever the theme is, you've got more cards that will help you win along with that theme. So in that example, none of this deck, like nothing we talked about intends to do creature combat. I mean, sure, we might be able to get a Psychosis Crawler that's enormous. Maybe there's a Rogue's Passage in there. We could like sneak it through for some kind of thing like that. I mean,
that right there is another example of what we're talking about, though, right?
Yeah,
sliding in a Rogue's Passage when
it.
Yeah, exactly. When you know your Psychosis Crawler can get really big, it's like, well, in the odd time where I get these two cards together and that situation comes up, I might be able to win with this. So that's just building more win conditions.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So then let's take a moment and talk about specifically combo decks, right? Decks that are like, I want these 3 cards together, and if I can get these 3 cards resolved, I will win the game for whatever reason will happen. So what do you do if that is broken, right? So I know, I mean, I don't play a lot of competitive EDH, CEDH, but I know that if you're running a dedicated competitive combo deck, you have a lot of tutors in your deck. If there's any redundancy in your combo, you run that as well. So I mean, again, redundancy. But what about those combos where it's like the best part of my combo doesn't have that same kind of redundancy? I just have to hope I get it and get the things going. What do you do in that case? How do you build around that?
Yeah, that's a tough thing to know about, right? So like simply, I mean, Splinter Twin, Kiki Jiki, right? Those 2 cards have the same effect, so that's more redundancy built in. But what if you are, say, like an Animar deck?
Yeah.
Where you have Animar as your commander, and it's completely revolving around that strategy, right? So you're talking about getting Animar out. You're talking about reducing the mana cost of all your creatures and playing things for free and things like that. But what if you don't have Animar out and you just got board wiped? That's actually one of the big criticisms against those Animar decks, or like one of the big weaknesses that those decks have, is that after a board wipe, and if Animar did get too expensive, like what do? You just have a bunch of creatures that, I mean, you can cast a couple of them, I'm sure, but it's not the same power level. So I know for decks like decks that care about, like, say, ramping into like a big like Genesis wave or something like that, you kind of have this built-in other side of the deck that at least you have a ton of ramp in there because you want the biggest Genesis wave possible. And then your safety valve is just that you have ramped so much that maybe you'll just start playing those big creatures, right? Something like Epic Experiment, you build in all these crazy big mana like spells that do really crazy effects, and you can get to the point where maybe your Epic Experiment got like dissipated, so now it's exiled. But you still have like a ton of mana around because a big part of that deck is ramping, and you just are playing big spells for big effects, right? So that's kind of a built-in move where, yeah, it's all dependent on this one card, but you're not necessarily out. You're not necessarily done if you build it the right way. If you build enough ramp in, if you eat your vegetables first.
This also reminds me of the Jota decks that are out there, right? Jota wants to cheat out gigantic spells by paying 5, but once you get to like 9 or 10 mana, if they deal with Jota, you're like, well, I guess I'll just cast this card the hard way and destroy all creatures that are not mine, and now I've got control of them or whatever. You could still do nutty stuff. So I think that speaks to, like, that's a deck that wants to go bigger and bigger and bigger. So your inevitability so the commander just makes it more efficient.
Yes.
Right? That deck wants to do gigantic things. Any number of them is their plan A.
Yeah.
Their commander just wants to make it go as fast as possible.
And one of the ways that makes it more efficient one of them makes it more effective is that efficiency, right? So that efficiency in the early game is super important for Jota, because on turn 5, it's going to play some 9-mana spell and then win the game, hopefully. But like on turn 10 or 11 or 12 or whatever, that efficiency loses a bit of its. I mean, you can double spell in a turn with Jota, which is that same exact thing happening. That efficiency is still good. But one thing I was going to say that you need to then back up these types of strategies is lots of draw, right?
Yeah.
You need to have that card draw if you're going to be playing these types of things, because especially in the early game, if your plan gets disrupted, you need to just at least find anything else in your deck that can come out and help out.
Yeah, right? Like, so I think draw is huge. So we used Niv Mizzet as an example, and Niv Mizzet's core is just drawing cards, right? So if you don't get your key pieces, you're still drawing a bunch of cards. You still got action to do, right? Jota is playing giant things. Presumably you're drawing cards. I was going to bring up like a token strategy, right? Token strategies usually rely on a few cards working together. You probably want to build your board large with a lot of tokens, and those tokens probably come from a few cards worth of sources. Maybe an instant that makes a bunch of tokens. Maybe you've got one card on the battlefield that's been generating tokens over a few turns, but it's usually... except for the case of Assemble the Legion, like there aren't many cards that make a token army by themselves without much effort. Assemble the Legion, just a fantastic token card.
Yeah.
But if you get wiped, you need to rebuild those up with several cards. You need to commit several cards to the table. So this is, again, an example where draw is kind of key to your plan B, no matter what it is. Like you're going to have to get it back.
Yeah, you need to get the plan B.
Right. And even if your plan B isn't any more specific, like a token deck, most cards go for their plan A. Like, cards make tokens. It's like most of the cards in my deck make a bunch of tokens. Like that's all part of your plan A. And then you're just going to overwhelm people with it. So you just want as much of your plan as possible. Therefore, draw.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing is like, so you might have a token deck that wants to just get down on the ground, pump them all up, and then swing for a big win. But what if someone's running like that Archon that doesn't even let you attack?
Right.
You can't attack them. Your deck can't just be attacking that, right? Now, obviously, you can have some removal spell or something like that, but unless you draw that, you're completely out of luck, and that might be giving that person enough time to find their answer to what you're trying to do. So other things like now I forgot the name of them. It's another Boros card, but it comes in and it deals damage equal to the number of creatures you have.
Ooh. It's a creature that does that, right?
Yes, yeah, it is. Yeah.
Legionnaire, maybe.
Anyways,
I'll look it up.
But like
Rakdos Charm is a very common.
Rakdos Charm is good for someone who's playing tokens and has a bunch of tokens out. Absolutely.
Right.
Because that one will deal damage equal to how many creatures they have. Actually, does Rakdos Charm hit everyone?
It hits everybody. You don't want to run Rakdos Charm when you're the token deck.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But just that example, just that idea of attacking on a different angle, right? So whether it's like, even if it's just a handful of cards in your deck that might do it, but dealing direct damage based on creatures you have or something like that in a token deck, or being able to like Goblin Bombardment them all away and deal damage that way, that's another idea of like, you might not necessarily think of it as needing a sacrifice outlet, even though sac outlets are just generally very good in Commander. But yeah, in a Boros deck and you're running, Assemble the Legion and you're making a bunch of tokens, Goblin Bombardment is an amazing card. Just being able to, for free, deal that kind of damage and just finish someone off, especially someone who you can't attack for whatever reason, is amazing.
Foundry Champion.
That's the one. So yeah, go ahead.
This also brings up the idea of like, what about cards that are basically only ever plan B cards, right? Like I find myself, Taurian Mauler comes to mind. Any of those cards that get big when you cast spells. I run Taurian Mauler in a few decks that don't necessarily care about tribal synergy, so they don't take advantage of the shapeshifter, nor are they interested in like, +1/+1 counters. I just run it a lot because it comes down early, it comes down cheaply, and if it isn't dealt with, it becomes a true force to be reckoned with.
Yep.
So it's one of those like, maybe it doesn't directly affect my plan A, but it's automatically a plan B if things go wrong.
You know what's another card that does that we absolutely love and talk about all the time? Mind's Dilation.
Mind's Dilation is a plan B in a can.
Yeah, exactly. Mind's Dilation is just a card that does that for you. It can open up other strategies your deck doesn't even know about, you know? Like,
yeah.
You might flip something. You might flip I don't know, like an Emrakul or something. Or you might flip some kind of, another, like a Ulamog, and you might now be milling them out 20 cards per turn when you attack them. Like, so, yeah, Mind's Dilation is that's the reason that card is so good. Not only the pure card advantage it's giving you just by casting other spells, which is obviously very good, but the ability that now your deck can start to even attack on a different angle, possibly.
Huge. So I think one last idea I want to bring up is we've been talking about things that your deck can do in building, but when it comes down to identifying your plan B and or your plan A, how fragile it is, how easy it is to keep up, one thing we must consider is the politics of the table, right? Especially if you're down to plan B mode and you need to do some damage, that's when you need to really lean harder on politics than before and try to maybe my plan B can win against one person, but my plan B isn't going to take out the whole table. That's when you got to team up somehow and figure out a way to take out the biggest threat who's still on their plan A, if you figured that out.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best things to do in a situation like that actually is that I found is feigning. You might not even be feigning the weakness, but feigning weakness or just laying low in general even. At that point, like you might look like you, sometimes looking like you can't do anything is actually the best move, right? Now, if you follow the philosophy of always step on necks, which is something we've learned the hard way so many times.
And continue to not do.
Yeah, and continue to just ignore that. But it's real, right? It's real. It's the thing of like not wanting to destroy a person's lands or land like one or two lands because they only have 5 or 6 lands. It's like, yeah, that's a feel bad moment for those people. But if you give them time, they're going to come back in the game. They're drawing gas right now. They just can't play it yet. But playing on that, and if you know that, especially in your group, that people are going to be hesitant to take someone out if their plan A has been so disrupted that it looks like they're completely out of the game, or just while people are looking elsewhere, right? Like they might have dealt with your plan A, and now they're looking at one of your other opponents because that person has a more menacing board. Well, that's going to give you time, and if you play that angle a little, like an extra turn or two even, you might be able to eke out enough like advantage in that time to get right back into the game. So that's actually a bit of a sub, like a plan B, like layer. Like that might be like whatever your plan B is. If you play that as well, I think it's just going to help you a bit sometimes.
Yeah.
It's hard to do though, right? You might be the person at the table that everyone's always coming at because they know that your deck is that powerful. So
sure,
it's interesting to see how you'll be able to play that up.
And I guess one thing that, maybe that's worth noting that, we can't go on, we could talk about these topics forever, I feel sometimes, but maybe just put some effort in building your decks so that, what if your plan B and your plan A are both tied? I could go either way depending on how the cards go, and they're both kind of strong and kind of good. So, and that's a great way to keep your opponents off balance, because once they've seen you execute plan A, they're ready for it, but then you just go hard into your plan B, which is as effective as plan A, and then they're like, well, I didn't plan on stopping this one.
That's my favorite way to deck build. I know that the criticism against that is that you may be weakening one of your plans if you have more than one, right? Like if you have plan A, plan B, plan C, well, you might just be better off with a plan A and a plan B just because adding that third one might not be as strong, and it's actually just taking away from the main strategy. But I think there are lots of ways, and lots of fun ways more specifically, like if you're not as worried about spiking out and just crushing everyone right away, you might have even more fun, because when you do that, not only does each time you sit down to play your deck, it might play differently, so it's going to give you some fun variation that way, but also, when one of those plans fails, you might start drawing the cards for the other one, or it'll at least give you different decision points and different sort of tracks to follow. So I as a deck builder, that is one of my favorite ways to build decks and to ensure that I'm always playing and I'm always doing something, and might even be doing something I've never even done before on like the third or fourth play of the deck.
Nice. I like it. So it just, we'll kind of start wrapping it up there, but just keep in mind when you're brewing a deck together, take some time and focus on like, what is your plan A? If you're able to articulate your plan A and then articulate a couple of plan Bs, you'll be able to build much more effectively and focus in on those. Maybe you notice you don't have any plan Bs. If so, put some stuff in to rebuild your plan A in case it goes wrong.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the discussion this week.
Great. Hope you enjoyed it. Big thanks to all our patrons who make these episodes possible.
Yeah, and if you want to check out more comedy videos, check out our Brews News playlist.
Make sure you follow us on Twitch TV to see when we play live.
If you want to chat with us, head over to Twitter. We're at Commanders Brew.
And please hit subscribe to ding the bell and find out when we got new stuff coming out.
See you next time.
Bye.